Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the North County Estate Planning Council's April meeting. I'm Ollie Ben from the Jewish Community Foundation. Thank you for joining the program today. Here at the Jewish Community Foundation, we believe that every individual can make a difference, and together we can change the world. Over the past decades, we have been the largest grant maker in San Diego and currently manage over $650 million in assets on behalf of individuals, families, and organizations. We facilitate their philanthropy, match their special interests, and provide personalized granting services. We stay abreast of current issues locally and beyond, and are very proud of a reputation of trust in the community. We have committed resources to our partnership with you, our esteemed professional advisor community, and are the go-to organization when our partners have questions or needs for their clients, particularly when it involves the use of non-cash assets to advance charitable giving in tax-effective ways. We are creative and inclusive, so please reach out and get to know us. And if you're not a member yet of our trusted charitable advisor network, enrollment is now open for our 2021 class. This program helps professional advisors develop the skills and confidence to incorporate charitable giving into their own offerings to clients. It's an incredible network, and it is intended for experienced professionals, whether in solo practice or at a large organization. Advisors receive tremendous value for the lunchtime workshops and the network you will become part of. Here is a sample of the amazing local and national firms that are part of our TCA network. Lastly, and before I turn it over to you, Bill, and the wonderful presenters today, here at JCF, we read very widely about nonprofits, the world of philanthropy, as well as Jewish causes in San Diego and beyond. If you'd like to read over our shoulders and receive a regular email every couple of weeks with our curated selection of the most interesting things we've run across, just put your name and email in the chat and we'll add you to the list. This is free and open to everybody. And with that, I will turn it over to Bill Super.
Good morning, everyone. Glad you all could make it to this early morning hour for the North County Estate Planning Council San Diego April meeting. We've got a great presentation today with a panel of the leaders of the San Diego's 3 largest community foundations: Christy Wilson of the Rancho Santa Fe Foundation, Mark Stewart of the San Diego Foundation, and Beth Soroll of the Jewish Community Foundation. They will be joined by Terry Mazzani of the Foundation of Greater Atlanta as moderator. They're going to cover keeping the trust, community foundations, your clients, and making a difference. Just a few announcements as we go forward. Certainly on the meeting announcement that goes out. If you tootle way down, you'll see a list of upcoming events. May 4th is our next meeting, and that's going to be a presentation by our Hot Topic ladies, Katie Swafford, Roberta Robinson, and Kristen Shepard, who are going to be going over an update on federal and state tax laws, cases, and rulings. June 1, we have a presentation by John Kramer about WealthPoint LLC, who's going to be presenting on advanced life insurance planning. Just a heads up, San Diego is the newest chapter in the Association of Advisors in Philanthropy, AIP. We're certainly actively involved. So those of you that have an interest in the philanthropic side, and of course that works perfectly with today's presentation, certainly let me know. You should all have my email and we'll hook you in with what will be happening. We are starting to open up. I'm going to be talking to Fairbanks Ranch today to see River Country Club to see what they're doing. In the meantime, do participate in our trifectas. This is led by Pete Tentler, and it'll be a great way to develop deeper relationships with a small group of professionals in a more intimate setting. Certainly, you go to the website for the council, www.ncepc-sd.org. David Jacobs has been doing a bang up job on improving that website. Without any further ado, let me jump in. Our sponsor today is John Kramer of WealthPoint LLC. John is having technical difficulties, so I will be giving John's presentation as far as the sponsor piece. The WealthPoint LLC is a multi-state advanced estate planning estate and life insurance planning firm. John has been a principal there for a number of years, and they have kind of a unique approach in dealing with their clients. And they start off with instinct verification, where the clients are headed, the pulse of progress, the monitoring where they're going, still wisdom, and then pulling it all together in what they call no story. The practice really kind of extends beyond advanced life insurance services, but also includes business advisory services and executive benefits, the non-qualified deferred compensation, and so on. John is a unique individual just in his own right, a very advanced life insurance professional, but he has two other jobs that he deals with, and one of those, he's the leader of the Kramer Family Office, multi-generational family office, I think more or less centered in Orange County. And more importantly, and totally fitting for today, John has a huge passion for philanthropy and charitable giving. And he has some unique pieces that he pulls together in that regard.
Bill, I think John has actually joined us now.
Hey, Bill, I could not have asked for a better introduction. And I'm so sorry. I had a computer problem this morning, but I'm very, very happy to be here to host today and to be a part of this.
Well, fantastic. Add something more if
John, we have your presentation up on the screen. I don't know if you want to just go back through any part of it.
Yeah, if you could go back just to the diagram, because I think it's helpful. I'll try to move this at a quick speed. And again, my apologies to everybody.
No.
If you work for a nonprofit, have you had trouble inspiring a multi-million-dollar endowment gift from a donor when they have the clear means to start one? A donor that's vocalized their commitment and excitement for your organization. And if you're a legal and tax advisor, do you have wealthy clients who don't have a good picture of their financials and therefore fear that they may not have enough themselves? And because they procrastinate, they miss the opportunity to plan ahead and efficiently transfer wealth to family. And I think for all of us, especially wealth managers and bankers, they've seen and watched families build wealth and businesses and seen those families fail because they can't govern, share, or work together to continue the momentum their parents started for them. I think we've all faced these issues and these problems probably more often than we'd like. I've spent the last 30 years of my careers working with the techniques of estate planning, life insurance, and family office governance to help solve these types of issues. And when we can solve them, then we can really pursue our passion, which is using planned giving to inspire philanthropists and help them maximize that giving. You see, we believe we can truly only inspire clients after they are confident that they are provided for, that their advisors have addressed the concerns and goals for their family and clearly understand the philanthropic objectives. And we do that using this approach that you see on your screen. We call it the Know Your Story process. And we use this to help clients get crystal clear about their goals. We start from a place of still wisdom, where we get everyone present, including the advisors, present in their thinking and uncover what everyone at the table really desires in their outcomes. Next, we try to uncover what relevant factors may have been missed in the financial planning thus far. Instinct verification evaluates goals in 3 realms: numerical, operational, and relational. Clients see their documented goals written down and financially modeled, sometimes for the first time. And the Pulse of Progress is our tool to hold all parties accountable once decisions have been made. We finish up, follow through, and proactively tend to our commitments and our relationships. We believe that this whole process, the Know Your Story, helps clients arrive at instinctual clarity about how they'd like their story to play out going forward. And we get excited. Insurance in itself is not always the most fascinating of fields. It's complex, it's interesting, but when we can use it as a tool to help wealthy families and business owners increase their level of giving to their family, transferring wealth to the generations behind them, but also allow them to support charity at the same time. That's where we find a lot of excitement in our work. And if we can preserve exemptions and leverage transfers using life insurance, we can increase the after-tax inheritances and expand the opportunity for philanthropy. Our clients' worlds are shifting like no time ever in history, and plans that made sense 10 years ago often are out of place and obsolete today. We review a large number of insurance portfolios, not only for our clients, but for the clients of advisors as well. We try to fine-tune those policies and explore additional opportunities to achieve the desired outcomes. Sometimes it's simple changes that can be made that create sizable benefits, but more often, problems are complex and require in-depth analysis and creative solutions. You can see in this slide attached to the presentation the range of services that our firm offers in life insurance, business advisory, and executive benefits. We don't do any wealth management, but we try to utilize increased exemptions and do this in a way to really leverage the wealth that can be transferred to families. And once that's done adequately, we can assist families with oftentimes gifting their existing insurance portfolios and annuities to charity. And we've had a lot of fun doing that in the past couple of years as the exemptions have grown. The amount that's available that families no longer need in their own insurance and annuities can be transferred to charity, generating large deductions, a lot of tax savings, and perpetuate not only endowments, but also current giving from these families as well. So I think that's enough for today. Thank you again for the great introduction, Bill, and I'll turn it over.
Thanks so much, John. Really appreciate your support of the council and today's webinar. With that, we're ready to kick off our program. Terry Mazzani, is he on the line here?
Yes, he is.
There he goes. Hey, Terry, how are you?
Good morning.
Calling from Atlanta. Terry's a senior vice president of philanthropy for the Community Foundation of Greater Atlanta. After a very varied career with careers in archaeology, public education, and now philanthropy, he's really kind of done it all. But the one constant throughout these roles is his commitment to improving educational opportunities for all children. He is currently the Senior Vice President of Philanthropy for the Community Foundation of Atlanta, and that's following a distinguished career of 13 years as President and CEO of the Chicago Community Trust. During his tenure, he led innovative grant making and doubled the Community Foundation's assets to more than $2.8 billion, awarding more than $300 million in grants annually. In recognition of the 100th anniversary of the first Community Foundation, Terry and his colleagues, David Perry, co-edited Here for the Good, Community Foundations and the Challenges of the 21st Century. He serves on numerous nonprofit boards, very active, and we're thrilled to have him as part of the webinar today on our community foundations. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Terry, who's got some opening remarks, and then we'll bring our panelists in. Thanks so much. Take it away, Terry.
Great. Thank you, Bill, and good morning, everybody. Absolutely delighted to be able to join you here. You have the gift of outstanding community foundations serving your region and tremendously accomplished professionals with Beth and Christy and Mark. And so I'm really pleased to be part of this panel today, provide an opening context about the vital role for community foundations and a little journey back in history to provide a context for why we were created and the value that we serve going forward for that. One theme that I've heard already is the theme of trust that underlies so much of that. That's no accident that the first community foundations were called trusts, and they were tackling the challenges of the accumulation of estate gifts that were designated to a single purpose. And those purposes may have changed over time. It was addressing what was called the dead hand of philanthropy. So how to create philanthropic contributions that are able to be flexible and agile to adapt to the changing needs of a community over time. Thus were the seeds of the notion of perpetuity. If I could have my slides up, please. Thank you. So over 100 years ago, the community trust was an idea and it was spoken to in these ways. Next slide. And remarkably, community foundations were born of banks, and at the time, the progressive movement at the turn of the last century, which has now been nicely documented by Bob Putnam in his newest book that came out, The Upswing, where he talks about trends in economics, politics, society, that move from a we orientation to an I orientation, and now moving back towards a we orientation. But it was within this context that community foundations were an expression of our collective good and our common interests. Next slide. I was fortunate to lead the Chicago Community Trust through its centennial, and that provided a wonderful education for this 100-year-old institution in the role that it played in metropolitan Chicago. The ideals found in it were such as, people get the greatest good out of life, not by what they do for themselves, but by what they do for others. Next slide. And the first executive director here, Frank Denon Loomis, he wrote a brief history of the Chicago Community Trust at its 50th anniversary and had this wonderful phrase: the community foundation's sole reason for existence is service, service to the contributor of capital funds and service to the community. Service must always be the watchword. Community foundations are service organizations. It is our commitment, and it's a double trust, service to the community and service to the donors, that distinguishes us from other forms of philanthropy. Next slide. So given I've had a number of years to think about what community foundations are all about, the proposition is very simple. We connect caring community members to impactful causes. It's no more complex than that. Next slide. And so it's the notion then that the community would benefit if individuals are able to pool their resources to meet the community's most pressing needs, not just for the moment, but in perpetuity. Next. And we are tax-exempt public charities dedicated to improving the quality of life in a particular geographic region. Thus, we can receive funds and distribute funds. Next. One of the visionaries for community foundations, Paul Ilsacker, captured it when he said the essential role that community foundations play is that of making a community more of a community. And that was the genesis of the book that I co-edited with David Perry for the 100th anniversary of the field. He's a scholar of anchor institutions at the University of Illinois, and we would have breakfast regularly to help me keep attuned to issues of community development in metropolitan Chicago. In one morning, I think he was trying to needle me a bit because he asked the question, he said, "Hey, Mazzani, you call yourself a community foundation, but are you foundational to community?" I think maybe he thought he'd get a rise out of me, but in fact, I just said, you know, that's a really great question. And that became the genesis of our book, exploring the ways that community foundations indeed do make a community more of a community. And we took the thesis of his scholarship in anchor institutions. We applied that scholarship to community foundations. And out of that, the finding of our book was that community foundations are the quintessential anchor institution because our mission is community. The traditional anchor institutions, medical institutions and higher ed universities, they all have unique self-interested missions at the end of the day. Yes, they serve the community broadly. They're deeply rooted typically by their buildings and facilities, but it's only community foundations that have the well-being and prosperity broadly shared of the entire community at heart. And that is the basis of the book that we wrote, showing a number of case studies of how this plays out in various communities. Next slide. So those various communities, there are over 700 community foundations across the country. From the origins in Cleveland with one, it has grown substantially every state and region. Next slide. And it's become one of our country's greatest exports to the world, more than 1,600 community foundations across the globe. Mott Foundation in particular is very fond of making these international connections with community foundations as a global idea that has taken root. Next slide. So as just the most current example, we can look at the response beginning a year ago with the pandemic and the fact that community foundations had this reservoir of philanthropic capital to serve as the first responders of philanthropy, in many cases with Jewish federations, Jewish community foundations, United Ways, but all united to respond quickly. So what we saw is that the dollars going out from community foundations was in excess of the dollars in, and an extraordinary amount of generosity because of this reservoir of resources available. Next slide. So as we know, the COVID-19 impact was this perfect storm, a trifecta of healthcare disparities, economic crisis, social justice movements that have made last year the word unprecedented has been used in an unprecedented number of times in circumstances for us. Next slide. So here in Atlanta, in partnership with the United Way, immediately raised $25 million that was then distributed over the next 4 months. Everything from childcare for the essential workers and first responders. When all of our society closed up, people still needed to go to work and they still needed places to care for their children. That was essential. The pivot for education to remote learning expose the lack of broadband access and the lack of devices for so many young people. We've all seen the long lines in food banks and food distribution, urgent needs there, the financial assistance to be able to pay rent and mortgages, small businesses to keep them from going under, the eviction moratoriums, the disparities of health as entire neighborhoods were excluded from access to health. And we see that continuing today with the disparate delivery of vaccinations across there. So our response was bold, fast, and responsive to these needs. And that happened across the country. Next slide. All total, more than $1.4 billion was raised and distributed. A number of community foundations, because of their pivotal role as civic leaders, were asked to then partner with government for distributing CARES Act funding for that. And the fact that donors themselves increased their grant making year over year by 42%. And overall, with a population of 84 community foundations that collaborate on a national effort, $6.7 billion, just astounding resource for a community. So for those of you professional advisors say, well, you know, what case do I make for why this matters today and why it matters in the future? This is exactly that case. The tremendous resiliency of communities with this reservoir of philanthropic capital to apply at a time where those of you in Southern California know that the hits just keep on coming, from climate change to poverty to immigration to health issues. It's never ending, and we need community foundations more than ever. Next slide, please. So with that, it's the notion of individual donors are really important. And next slide. Next button. It's that collective impact which makes a real difference in the effective strategies that are able to help lift people out of poverty, increase education attainment, address issues of pervasive homelessness and food insecurity. Next slide. So when community foundations think about that double trust of serving the community and serving donors, with donors, it's a very personal relationship with each and every donor in terms of beginning with their values and interests. John, I think, did a great job of looking at that with your diagram and the efforts that you take as a professional advisor to have a deep conversation with your clients about their philanthropic goals and interests and how those dovetail with their life interests and plans. So a lot of it's about family philanthropy. Community foundations excel with supporting intergenerational philanthropy, strategic grant making, because we have intimate knowledge of the needs of the community, the nonprofits that are making a difference here, and the strategies more broadly, things like to end homelessness, for instance. Doing this through approaches like co-investment with donors and other philanthropic capital, and then the longer term legacy planning so that the wealth of individuals can be converted into philanthropic benefit in perpetuity, serving the community. Next. So how we do this can be looking at a number of donor personas, as we've looked in here in Atlanta. A number of people just use this as a charitable checking account initially and become more engaged later on. Others enjoy the engagement through their philanthropy. Some are very strategic. Some like to start something that others will contribute to. Some absolutely recognize the value of community foundations and trust the grant making prowess of the foundation itself. And then others are looking at creating a tradition of philanthropy, using that as the glue to hold their family together, creating, it's not unusual for a wealthy couple to create donor advised funds for their children and their children. So you have this cascading effect. Oftentimes the busiest time of the year for community foundations is around Thanksgiving, when families come together, and our staff are facilitating family meetings that have an annual tradition where they decide on a set of grants for the year. Next. So the fact that we broadly serve the community, not only donors, but professional advisors who are the lifeblood of community foundations have always been. We do not have a large sales force. Often we are lean and agile, but it's our relationship with professional advisors that make all the difference, closely connected to nonprofit leaders, civic leaders, corporate partners, young people, media journalists, helping to tell the stories that matter for residents in our region. Next. So as professional advisors, I view the philanthropy increasingly important in your practice. Having that philanthropic conversation as part of developing a deeper relationship with your clients, and clients able to see a new side of you if you haven't done this routinely, that it gives them depth of understanding of your commitment, your firm's commitment to the community where you live. Helps clients seeking purpose in life, families building the region's endowment. And it's also, I think, a factor for younger professional advisors in their career growth and development. Next slide. Everything from
Terry, just so you know, we're running up on time a little bit.
Great. Okay. All right. So there are a number of turnkey solutions that we do easily. The technical side of this work. Next slide. And then are stewards of our community's endowment with a variety of vehicles for this. Next slide. And are very catalytic, linking together interest and resources to solve the most pressing needs of community. And next slide. And helping to preserve and advance your client's legacy and intergenerational values. Next slide. So with that, we're going to turn over to the panel now to talk about how they work with your clients for that. And so I have a series of questions here, and feel free for Beth, Christy, or Mark to also just add to what I was sharing here. But we'll start with the more pressing, how your foundations responded during the pandemic and the role that donor advised funds in particular played at that time. So I'll start off alphabetically for this round with Beth. Oh, here's our few.
Yeah, it has to be one time when someone has to say you're on mute. It wouldn't be a webinar without that. You know, I think it's really interesting, the increase that we saw nationally. DAF distributions were up about 30%. You know, grants to nonprofits from DAFs. At the same time, we had a number of donors and a number of donors who, because of the CARES Act, bypassed their DAF for the year because they could get better tax benefits by going direct to nonprofits. So the total donor contributions to nonprofits in COVID really astronomically high. I guess I should take a minute because Terry, we didn't do introductions. Most everybody on the call knows me. I'm Beth Searle. I'm the CEO of the Jewish Community Foundation. Ollie gave a great introduction to the Jewish Community Foundation at the beginning of the webinar, and we are really proud to host the council every month. So that won't go into a huge amount on that. The biggest thing I think that we saw, and I know Mark and Christy will add to this, that our donors were just so profoundly caught up in what can I do and how can I do it? How can I make the biggest difference in the daily lives, of people in our community and in people suffering around the world? About 3/4 of our grants stay in San Diego, but 1/4 of them, go elsewhere in the States and around the world that, are obviously equally impacted. So I think that'll start us off, and I'll let Christy and Mark add. And I guess, Christy, if we're going in alphabetical order by first name, you're up next.
And I was looking at last name, so
I
good
was
morning,
too.
everyone.
I was too, so I was like, wait, I'm up first.
Anyway, good morning, everyone, and thanks, Bill, for having us. It's always a pleasure to speak with all of you. And Terry, thanks for joining us from Atlanta. It's an honor to be able to talk about our community foundations, and I think in particular to be able to talk about how the three of us and other community foundations in the San Diego region work together through all of this. We're the three largest, but there are affiliates of San Diego and some independents, and then just all the community foundations across the country, and we all really do the same thing. And I think where we really saw this most evidently displayed was last year. To Beth's point, our donors stood up and said, what can we do? But I think the other thing that perhaps slightly in hindsight was that they could do it so easily because they had a relationship with their community foundation. And when they worked with their donor advised funds, that was one thing. If they chose to do things outside of their donor advised funds for other reasons, the impact was absolutely enormous. And what we're seeing, we ran some numbers. So year over year, from the first quarter of 2019, first quarter of 2020, first quarter of 2021, the giving trend has continued. Our donors are continuing to give, and they're realizing that this COVID-19 thing it wasn't a sprint. This is a marathon. This is going to go on for years. And I think the relationship with the Community Foundation has proven that this is going to continue. And just by way of advertisement, and thanking everyone for being here, we're proud to say that this is our 40th year in San Diego, and just really happy that, we've been able to be around for as long as we have, and we continue to do the good work that we do. So now, Mark, I'll turn it over to the first name alphabet test.
Well, Beth would have kicked us off anyways with last name. So
No, I just realized that. That is so unusual. But you're right.
So everyone, good morning. It's great to be with you. This is my first time with the North County Estate Planning Council, and I hope you'll have me and my colleagues back after this presentation. But over the last year, the San Diego Foundation really dug in deep on COVID-19 relief through our Community Response Fund. And so overall in this last year, we brought in gifts of about $128 million. And in that same period of time, we pushed out $105 million into the community with, as Beth mentioned, the great number of that staying here within San Diego. The Community Response Fund in and of itself brought in about $66 million, and we've pushed out now about $58 million, which is probably one of the biggest efforts of a community foundation in the country, and just had so many partners come forward. But the thing that I was most gratified, probably like Christy and Beth, is that when we put the call out to our fund holders to say, would you please join us? We also said, if you want to do work on your own, please give to general operating support. And I can tell you over the last 12 months, I have just been gratified to see the number of our fund holders who just, they've given up funding galas, given up funding special projects, just have gotten general operating support out, because we need to keep our nonprofits well and healthy during this time. Our three organizations, we don't do any direct service. We are that cinch point where we take the dollars in and get the dollars out. And so we need a healthy and strong nonprofit community. And that's where I see community foundations being so impactful.
Great, thank you all. Let's talk then looking forward. Community foundations are always forward looking for the well-being and prosperity of your communities. So how have the pressing needs changed or remained the same? What are the biggest issues that you are tackling in this year and beyond? We can go kind of reverse order here to break it up, starting back with Mark.
Thanks, Terry. So the San Diego Foundation just adopted a new 10-year vision, and it is quite simply, our vision is for just, equitable, and resilient communities. And probably the most important word of those 5 is communities, knowing that San Diego is not a monolithic environment. We've got communities by geography, race, ethnicity, shared work, shared values, etc. And so one of our big pushes is to see when the next major calamity takes over our world, how could everyone look to San Diego and say, why is this community less affected than the rest of the United States? And what sort of resiliency can we begin to address here? The other big push for us is advancing racial and social equity. We've also just launched the Black Community Investment Fund. I'm really pleased that we've cobbled together about $3.5 million to help 50 Black families get into their first homes with $70,000 towards closing costs and down payment. And some will see that as reparations. We see that as just helping to correct what has been a societal wrong since 1936 of redlining. So that addressing how we become just, equitable, and resilient, that's where we're focused for the next at least 5 years.
Great. Well, I'll jump into that conversation and talk about the fact that I've been in my role slightly longer in San Diego than Beth and Mark. And I think what I've seen is a trend, everybody's smiling, is that we're working together so well. We talk about, collaboration and collective impact and understanding the issues. And even though our discretionary grants primarily stay in North San Diego County, we've worked together throughout the entire region this year, particularly, and realizing that we can do a lot by ourselves, and we do, but when we're really trying to go deep into promoting the resiliency and the forward thinking of our communities, and to Mark's point, being the best community throughout the country that responded to this, we have to do this together. And I think that's what community foundations do, because we reflect the entire community and not just small points of view within the communities. We work together, and I think that played out in really perfect order last year. And I see it continuing, which I think brings a lot of hope and optimism for the vibrancy and the resilience of San Diego County going forward. And hopefully that translates into other places around the country.
So Mark, you all did your work separate from our work, but we came up with pretty similar words, which I think is, really says something about working together. Obviously the Jewish Community Foundation is very committed to ensuring that the Jewish community in San Diego and elsewhere flourishes, but we are equally committed to creating what we say a sustainable, just, and vibrant world, both here in San Diego and elsewhere. And really, we just took synonyms of each other. And some, I think you said just and resilient. Very similar, because that's what we have to do. That's the call. That's the mission and the call to action for every city in America. And as Christy and Mark said, we want to be the best. We have competitive spirit. We want to be the best at it. But we know, COVID has been an unbelievable, it's hard to call it an emergency when it's gone on for 16, 17 months, whatever it is. But we know it's not the last, it's not the last one. And it's, it really, our commitment is to make sure that we are ready, and that the nonprofit community, the social sector in this city is ready for the next one. I think it's really important to note, I mean, we have very specific issues in San Diego, the racial equity, food and nutrition, housing, the affordable housing, huge workforce development. These are all issues that philanthropy alone will not solve. And so the combination of government philanthropy and the investment of private capital has to come together to solve these problems. And that's a place where I think working with professional advisors and the community foundations, because there's impact investing that can be done outside of your philanthropic work as well as inside of your philanthropic work, but alongside granting that can make your clients that much more impactful on really critical issues that they care about.
Thank you. And Beth, I want to build on that, first addressing a question in the Q&A from Roberta about aggregating national funds. Not quite sure what you're meaning on this, but for instance, there were Black-led entrepreneurial efforts here in Atlanta that aligned with a strategic priority of the Rockefeller Foundation. And so we serve as a fiscal agent for those funds to come to the Atlanta area and then are distributed out. It's not unusual for community foundations to be highly regarded by the large national funders to place dollars. It began my career in philanthropy, a $20 million grant from the Gates Foundation for Education work in Chicago, for instance. And so it's difficult for national funders to be able to distribute locally to highly effective nonprofits, and they trust community foundations to have that intelligence and those relationships on the ground to be able to more effectively deploy philanthropic capital for that. So so that's just, hopefully that addresses the question. Beth, you had talked about, that the impact of this emergency that's lasted for months and months and months. So how does it feel that your world has changed forever? What do you see not going back to, or things that are different?
It's too early to say, although I've noticed, like, we started meeting with donors and others in our parking lot when as soon as government guidance was that you could. And at first you couldn't, then you could, then you couldn't again here in California. But we have had a number of outdoor meetings, and in fact we're building an outdoor conference space adjacent to our building for when we do return, which is sort of cool. And I know we're not going to be the only one, because part of how I got the idea is I got all these emails from office furniture manufacturers about outdoor office furniture, which I had never heard of before. So that clearly that industry is changing, and it's not the only one. I mean, it's one example of a pivot, but we've had, some donors say, or, where we're going over some stuff where the ability to share your screen is so helpful and so efficient that they choose, that I think they're choosing to want to be on Zoom. And I don't think that that's going to go away. And I know certainly from the way our foundation operates internally that we will have a hybrid workforce setting, where we won't require everyone to be in the office 5 days a week. And I mean, one of the great benefits of the last 15 months is the extent to which air quality has improved in every major city in America, because people are not commuting. And this is our opportunity and a wake-up call by Mother Nature to have a real impact on climate change by discouraging unnecessary commuting. And so I definitely think that that's going to take hold, and that will be our donors, it will be us. And so I think, we're still going to connect with people in person because people want to be connected. but I think we're going to be more strategic about when we get together in person and when not. And I think that's going to change dramatically, permanently.
Right. Okay, other thoughts, Mark or Christy, to add for how the world has changed forever?
I agree with what Beth is saying, and I was looking back on a series of emails that I got in February of 2020 from McKinsey Consulting, and many of you probably get the same series. And over a series of a couple of days, at the very beginning, before we really knew, the words that they were talking about was creativity, innovation, scenario planning, and the ability to pivot. And once we kind of fully understood what those meant in a COVID-19 environment, I've seen that play out in almost every aspect of my life. Groceries being delivered at home, to Beth's point, less driving, improved air quality, scenario planning. What happens if the market tanks again, or it comes back? What do we do? How do we respond? And I like to think that actually our world is going to be better. The short term, we've got a lot of issues to deal with, but if we use these short-term emergencies that lasted a long time to enhance the work that we do going forward, and philanthropy is increased because we have the ability to make that happen and we work with the government and whatnot, I think we're going to have a better world. I'm always a cup half full person, but I do think we'll have a better world because we're working together in a way that we haven't didn't have to in the past. So I think we take advantage of these opportunities and we make the best of them. My Pollyanna speech for the morning.
Excellent. Mark?
My two colleagues said it well.
I'm just going to add, Terry, for those of you who, if you didn't catch 60 Minutes on Sunday night, to your point, Darren Walker, the head of the Ford Foundation, was interviewed on 60 Minutes just this past Sunday night. And he really spoke about the future of philanthropy, and it's like a 13-minute segment, and the way, the ways that things will and won't change and need to change and don't need to change. And I thought it was really a worthwhile 15 minutes. So I encourage you to go look at that on YouTube. He's really an articulate speaker.
Very thoughtful about the future of the world. So let's shift a little bit now to some of the donor stories, the role that philanthropy plays. I think this will be more directly relevant now to those of you as professional advisors. And I want to do a little audible here and actually start with John Kramer as our sponsor, sharing a little bit about his story. As I was preparing for this, he was sharing a fascinating creative use of life insurance to be able to both fund and to power philanthropic contributions that I thought was really innovative. And then asked each of our panelists for really memorable stories of how philanthropy has played a vital role in their donors' lives. But John, if you wouldn't mind sharing, you did such a great job yesterday.
Oh, good. Thanks, Bill. And definitely a morning for being put on the spot between technology and your invitation. Thanks, Terry. I shared with Terry a concept we've been working on, Belinda and I. Been really happy to have her come into my practice, to have somebody in their 20s to help push me and to uplift me. But we've started to work with what we call compound giving. Talking to donors when they're making a major gift, when they're making a multi-million-dollar gift, if they're able to make a gift that large, thanking them, and then asking them a second question. You've made this great gift. Are you willing to make a gift of the tax savings you generate? And it's funny because it's a simple question. It's not complex, doesn't involve any planning, but it causes this big pause. And oftentimes people have said, well, I committed to make the $1 million gift. Yeah, I'll give the tax savings as well. And it's really interesting because in a high tax state like California, close to a 50% tax bracket, if you make a multi-million-dollar gift and then you give the tax savings, you can double the size of that gift. Because if you give not only the first year, but then continue to give the tax savings you generate every subsequent year, you'll actually match the size of the original gift. And it leads to a really interesting discussion where the second gift maybe isn't used for immediate needs. It could be placed in an endowment. It could be leveraged with life insurance and created an even larger endowment in the future. Or it can be used immediately if that's of the highest and best use to the charity and the donor. So we call that compound giving. And just like compound interest, we really think it can change the way that philanthropy is done in the future. Thanks, Terry.
Great. That's such a wonderful example. Let me start with Christy now. You can be the leadoff hitter here.
Get my mute button working. Well, I think one of the several examples that we saw last year when there was some uncertainty in terms of, what was going to happen with charitable giving, we had a couple of donors who just happened serendipitously to have major liquidity events in their lives. And in one case, it was rather unexpected. Relatively young donor, had a great idea, worked on it for a couple of years, and suddenly it was a great idea. And he found himself in a position of, for him, fairly extraordinary wealth. Worked hard, very smart, and suddenly he had a lot of money. And it was kind of like, okay, this deal is going to close. And what's it actually going to cost me? Talk about a high tax state. California is it. He wanted to leverage that. And he worked with one of the members of the estate planning council. And the firm helped him and his family work through a sudden infusion of wealth that they actually have turned into quite a philanthropic strategy. And it's remarkable. And the fun part of the story was that it was unexpected, certainly last year. And by working with professional advisors, and they're focused now on their family and 2 middle school age children, they're really working on what the family philanthropy is going to look like. It wasn't about buying the new big house or the new fancy car or whatever. It was really carving out some of that for reasons that were very meaningful to that family because what they were seeing in the world. And now they're really working on the family philanthropy strategy. So the point being is that there were big liquidity events that happened last year, and there will be coming up in San Diego. That's for sure. How do professional advisors work with the community foundations and the donors, and through options like John may have with people who've got substantial amounts of life insurance? How do we turn those new situations into positive good, not only for the families, but for the communities in which they live, and create future philanthropists?
Beth, you look teed up, ready to go.
Well, it's interesting. I think I've sort of seen this at 2 ends of the lifespan, in that we've seen so much more interest in deeper estate plan, legacy planning. Like people initially, gave what they could and continue to give what they can, but everybody confronted their mortality in COVID on some level. And so there was just a much greater interest in what's my legacy going to be, which of course we have that conversation with professional advisors all the time, and bring, and as we all do, the technical expertise to do that. So we've definitely seen much more thinking about what happens when I'm gone and I'm not here forever. And I need to really think about this both for myself and how do I want to involve the next generation in what's their role going to be when I'm not here, and many of those conversations. But we also saw, particularly post the George Floyd murder, I'm having so many more conversations with 20 and 30 somethings who are looking up and really, it has just really elevated the equity, the racial equity, the Black, Indigenous, people of color. I mean, BIPOC has become an expression that I don't think a year and a half ago was sort of an acronym the way that it has become. And so we're having many more conversations. I'm actually convening at their request, a group of 20 and 30 somethings who really want to talk about what it is to be inheriting, knowing that they're going to be inheriting significant wealth and significant philanthropic wealth, and not just 101 on what do I do with that. I mean, there's the mechanics of I want to have social impact. I don't really know how to do that, but also the conversation about how does that feel and what does that mean, and really starting to surface some of their own discomfort and some of their own excitement, because it's a responsibility, but it's also an enormous opportunity. So that I think it's been really interesting. I have personally, because of this, been learning just a huge amount more about the indigenous communities here in San Diego and across the country, and the historic experience and the current experience of indigenous people, and the challenges that those communities face in San Diego and really across the country. So that has been really interesting, and it has raised with the young people, because they have such an interest in the impact investing side, not just the philanthropic side, to really talk about how those two can can coexist for maximum impact. Because I think as this next generation with a whole different view of money and how it gets used in this world, that we need to make sure that philanthropy, that people make grants where grants are what's really necessary, and they make investments where they can, because it's the two together that are most impactful.
And Terry, what I'd add to that, and I cheer for my two colleagues, is that we have also seen heightened interest in passing down philanthropic interest and passion from one generation to another. We just had a couple who are, in their young 80s, maybe they're mature, and they have grandchildren who range from teenagers to maybe young 30s. And what they said is, we're going to put $500,000 into an endowment at the San Diego Foundation. We're going to call it the Blank Family Descendants Fund. And we're telling the kids that they get to decide where that distributable goes every year, but they have to work together to decide how to do it. And the grandparents knew that their grandkids had very different political views than they did, but when the list came forward from the grandkids, they were just so excited for what the kids had done together. And so I think that's one very exciting aspect. But I also, of things, as we say, fashions come and go. I think there are opportunities where some of the things that community foundations have always done have become new again. And so what we've experienced through COVID-19, where we were aggregating gifts and getting them out in the community, our fund holders are looking to us for answers. And so our three pillars of the strategic plan are advancing racial social justice, fostering equity of opportunity, and building resilient communities. And as I share this with our fund holders, they're saying, tell me more about this. This is exactly what I want to do. And so again, this is that great role that community foundations play as really the holders of community knowledge. That, I think there's a truism that most major gift donors probably spend less than 1% of their time thinking about philanthropy, and that they look to their wealth advisors to say, how do I manage all of this? But then they look to us to be able to give that objective reasoning and information about the best places that can align with their passions. So while some things are new, I see some things, some of the old things we've done are becoming new again.
One other thing I'm going to throw out there, in addition to, people would ask, like, what can I do beside money? And it was hard to volunteer in some ways because you couldn't go anywhere. But we, did get a lot of requests and continue to get requests and try to send people to places because they did have time, because they weren't commuting, and they, for whatever reason, they had your social life was not so busy. There was more disposable time and people wanted to put their time to use. And so we had some conversations about that, about donating blood, which has been, the Red Cross has been really in need in recent months. And so we actually, a few years ago before COVID, did a thing on organ donation. So, sometimes we look at what you can donate more broadly. It's not as relevant to the professional advisor relationship, but it is part of the whole that donors are asking, how can I make the biggest difference with all my resources? And I think we play a matchmaking role in that as well.
Mark, I couldn't help but smile when you referenced the Blank family. Here in Atlanta, we have a notable Blank family as well, the Arthur M. Blank Family Foundation, who are terrific partners. Back when we were doing our COVID relief fund, the large funders here, Woodruff with Coca-Cola and Blank, they immediately came in with substantial funds into this collective fund, the COVID response and relief fund, that they recognize the collective power of philanthropy. Want to shift a little bit more to the role with professional advisors and innovative and impactful giving. And I'll start off with one of the relationships that I had in Chicago is, again, from a professional advisor, an individual who was an entrepreneur 30 years ago, actually grew up in Oakland, California, where I spent a number of years with the public school system there and the like. But he built a very successful business that then he sold a few years ago, a large cash event. And it was in the aftermath of the Great Recession and the focus on creating jobs. And as a business person, entrepreneur, he was absolutely convinced that the best way to create jobs is through entrepreneurship and small business startup. And so he then not only contributed his funding, but his professional experience. And because of our relationship with the Community Foundation, there were a number of incubators for entrepreneurial training and small business startup in the neighborhoods around in Chicago. And so we introduced him to the leaders of those entrepreneurship training programs. He then selected one that he really liked, and he went to their pitch event at the end of the course, where each of the individuals was presenting their business plan for funding. From that, he then chose one of the individuals to invest in her business. It was a bean pie business that he helped to launch. And he chose a debt investment rather than an equity investment in this case. But he was so pleased with the results that then his next step was to gather his friends in business to then together adopt the next class of entrepreneurs coming out of the training, and each of them investing in one of those small business startup plans. And it kept growing and growing and growing. And it's just the unique way that a community foundation, with its feet on the ground, its understanding of complex strategy and deal making itself, how it could connect donors to these causes in a way that increased their impact, taking the circumstances of the donor very much to heart for what their passions are and how they could translate that into public benefit and community good. So with that, if each of you could share an experience that you've had with professional advisors that led to kind of an innovative breakthrough or example of how that client, your donor, helped to transform lives in your community.
So Terry, I'll be happy to start and maybe go in reverse order this time. But so the San Diego Foundation just on 5 days ago hired our first director of wealth advisor relations to really be able to focus on our activities with professional advisors in the region. And so I'm really excited for that work coming ahead, but we have just really begun our efforts on custom managed accounts where the money is with us, but of course the professional advisor still has that opportunity to manage the funds as the most trusted advisor that their clients have. And so there was one that we had recently where a wealth advisor helped to identify a mobile home park that their clients owned and made a gift of that to the San Diego Foundation. And it really became a general purpose scholarship fund that benefits students at Oceanside High School. And the proceeds, which now are about $4 million, continue to be managed by the wealth advisor. And we're probably the largest provider of scholarships outside the institutions of higher education in San Diego. And so it really helped to bolster that opportunity. But we also had an attorney who contacted us about an anonymous donor. And so we worked with this person and this client's wealth advisor, but they came to us really wanting complete anonymity of their giving. And again, it's a wonderful thing that community foundations can do. A private foundation doesn't get you anonymity. Having a DAF and a fund at a community foundation does that if a client so wishes to have something like that. So now we have a very significant anonymous fund. It's about $20 million now. And then this individual is able to grant out as he or she wishes. But again, and the wealth manager continues to invest these dollars on his or her behalf.
And Mark, there was a follow-on question in the chat about the wealth manager continuing to earn fees on those funds. If you could explain that part of the relationship.
Yeah, and so this is again where the funds may reside with us, but the wealth advisor continues to manage the funds and to be able to invest the funds and also draw a fee on those funds. What we don't want to do is have a break in that relationship between the client and their wealth advisor. There's just no need for that. And so these custom managed accounts that I think it's the good folks at Pittsburgh Community Foundation or Kansas City really developed this concept, and both those organizations have many hundreds of millions of dollars under management in such a capacity. And we're looking to see how we can significantly grow that line of business, which is really a win-win-win-win for the community, the client, the advisor, and the community foundation.
Great. And a little further on that, in Chicago, we have a partnership with the Northern Trust and the Northern Trust Charitable Giving Program, where the community foundation is the 501c recipient and owner, but the dollars stay with Northern Trust. And there's a fee sharing relationship there of a portion for Northern Trust and a portion for the community foundation, but calibrated to keep those institutions competitive in the marketplace generally, but recognizing the value add of the superior investment performance and the philanthropic advising. Beth, you were ready to.
No, I was going to say we've had a similar arrangement with numerous professional advisors for years now, where the professional advisor continues to manage the investment of the assets, even though they reside with us, and they continue to collect their investment fees, and we have the administration of the donor advised fund or the restricted fund or whatever it is. And that does it. It makes so much sense because the professional advisor, obviously you all are providing a concierge service and a customized service and a very personalized service. And you're really taking care of your clients. And that's what we all do. And so when you when you bring your client to one of us or to the Jewish Community Foundation, you can rest assured that they're going to get the same level of service that you would provide only on the philanthropic side. We're going to take them on very personalized site visits. We're going to work with them around, specifically around what their interests are, and work with you in the ways to do it in the most tax advantaged ways. So we definitely welcome you to talk about your clients and maintaining the investment piece while we work on the philanthropic side. We also really go out of our way to work with you on complex assets. There's a couple of stories. We had, and it's before COVID, but we had a couple come to us with an apartment building that they wanted to donate, but they wanted to put it in a charitable remainder trust, only it had a mortgage on it. And you're not allowed to put an encumbered piece of property into such a vehicle. And so we actually made an arrangement with them where we had a line of credit that paid off the mortgage. So we became a part owner of the property. Then it was donated to us. And then when it was sold, the proceeds went, the donor's proportion of the proceeds went into their donor advised fund, which they have moved on to do good with. But it also was a donation to the operations and the endowment of the foundation for our work on the piece that we purchased by paying off the mortgage. So it really was a win-win-win-win-win, but quite complicated and highly unusual. And obviously we took some risk, and we had to really make sure that we mitigated that. And my fabulous colleague that many of you know, Jeremy Pearl, and I did dance through a few hoops, to make that happen. But we really do try to meet with donors and the professional advisors. And sometimes they don't work out. We had someone bring us a vineyard not too long ago, and they're just given what they wanted to do with it and keep it operating. It didn't make sense to donate it. And we had to say no, but we try really hard to work with you, to meet you and your donor where they are, to take the assets that you want to donate. And just a second example, kind of more broadly in the community, that we're working with the Alumni Association of the Rady School at UCSD. Many of you know it's sort of the top entrepreneurial school, business school in the community, Terry, where many alumni go on to start and build very entrepreneurial biotech ventures. And so we've arranged where alumni can donate interests in their company, private interest in a privately held company, and we're holding on to it until there's an exit. And then at the point that there's an exit, however far into the future that might be, the donor can choose for it to go straight to the Rady School or into an endowment for the Rady School that is, it can go into current operations and spent now, or the donor can choose to put it in the endowment that we're managing for the Rady School in perpetuity. But it is a way to get young alumni and younger people engaged in philanthropy before that big, and getting them thinking about it before their big liquidity event.
So I would just add, we're so much smaller. We just don't really have the sophistication or the bandwidth to enter into some of these more sophisticated arrangements with the local wealth advisors. But what we have tried to do is to, with our donors, either because they're a referral from a wealth or professional advisor, or just they find us on their own, is to try to keep philanthropic funds managed on a local level through a local community foundation. And thereby working with professional advisors, banks, brokerage firms, whatever, to really keep the assets local, and not to get into a debate about the commercial donor advised funds versus the local ones. But the idea is to keep local assets as much as possible and as well managed locally as they possibly can be, to facilitate local donors, local philanthropy. The article that we provided as a pre-read to this program that was also authored by Terry talks about extricating funds from communities and the impacts of that. And so I think it's something that's good for the professional advisors in attendance this morning, as well as the Community Foundation representatives, to think about the fact that we are supporting first and foremost our local communities local donors, local assets, addressing local needs.
Great, thank you. Yeah, when I think about the transfer of wealth and the trillions of dollars circling the planet and our globalization, to me, the responsibility of a community foundation is to try to reach up and grab some of those dollars and make sure that they're tightly connected to the community that oftentimes is the origin of those funds. So appreciate your comment there, Christy. We have two more questions hope to cover, but we'll do this in the form of a lightning round that we'll start here. The first lightning round is the most unusual gift that you have seen in Atlanta. It was a share of a racehorse. It was very interesting. Christy, then Beth, then Mark, your most unusual gift.
Can't possibly compete. Cash, lots of stock.
Okay.
Wait, am I next, or what order were you going in again?
Yeah, Beth, go ahead.
Well, I mean, the apartment building was definitely in the 4 years that I've been at the foundation, that was the most complex and interesting gift. We've taken a number of interest in private companies where there's some due diligence to be done, that that there's a viability there, and that's really, I find, really interesting and unusual. We also have a donor, actually, Terry, from Atlanta, who had an enormous liquidity event such that the Jewish Community Foundation in Atlanta could not sort of manage it all, and so we've had a interest in a trust, in effect, which is also was very interesting, both intellectually, financially, from a risk perspective, and from the potential impact. And many of these unusual gifts are not impactful immediately because they do take time to liquidate, and they're often put into endowments because they are enormous amounts of money, and they have impact, forever.
Great. Mark?
The most unusual gift we received during the pandemic is one that actually brought me to tears. And I had received an email that said, I'm writing to you on behalf of a philanthropist who is interested in supporting you. Please give me a call. And it ended up being an advisor to Mackenzie Scott, who they had reviewed 6,500 nonprofits, decided to support 384 of them. And we were one of those beneficiaries, one of 6 community foundations that they decided to support, and just one of 4 charities here in San Diego. But it was an $8 million unrestricted gift from another DAF that she had to our community response fund that just reignited what we were able to do in this kind of last quarter for bringing comfort, hope, and joy to residents in San Diego. And that one brought me, if I wasn't sitting, it would have brought me to my knees.
Thank you, Mark, and congratulations on that. That's such a terrific example of your leadership. One more example, we had set up a shell for a supporting organization for a founder of a business. It's the business that innovated the switches that instantaneously protect power grids from surges and pulses, so it doesn't destroy your computers and other things. Very successful on his passing. He infused that with the privately held shares of stock of the company to be able to affect a transition to an employee stock ownership program. So you had to hold these shares and then sell it back to the employee-owned organization. So philanthropy, very creative roles to help business owners, entrepreneurs to be able to do the creative work that they want to do for their businesses. So final round here, I think we will make it easily under time here at the 9 o'clock close of this session. But the final lightning round, your opportunity to pitch the greatest advantage community foundations provide to clients of professional advisors. this time I'll let whoever feels inspired to go first. John, I see you're raising your hand.
Well, I would just like to pine in as an advisor for the other advisors in the room. I just did my first assisting a family that I'd helped set up a private family foundation 20 years ago. And it made a lot of sense at that time in their life. And they've decided recently with our help to transfer the assets to a community foundation. And it's great. It's going to be approximately $7 million. It's just brought a great sense of relief to the individual who was kind of struggling with how to continue the foundation, knowing that there's going to be the consolidated financial management, the wealth advisory services, their ability to really support the community in a whole nother level with a higher level of privacy is really exciting to them. So for those advisors who haven't looked into it, take a look. The tax deductions are better. This individual is making ongoing six-figure gifts every year. And now those will be, at least for 2020 and 2021, deductible at 100% of AGI instead of only 30. The same with appreciated gifts. There's benefits to the community foundation. So there's always a time for the private foundation, but there's a lot of benefits to the community foundations and the donor advised funds if you haven't seen them before. Thank you.
So Mark, do you want to go for your pitch?
Sure. So the only thing that I would add, and John's exactly right, we've been working with several families to do private foundation conversions because the benefits are just so remarkable, and it takes zero work after that. No 990s, no audits, no nothing. It brings the fun back in philanthropy, and that's probably if we have a charge that we carry out is how do we make philanthropy fun? So it becomes infectious and something that somebody just wants to do time and time again. So what I'd say to the professional advisors, and reach out to any of our three organizations, but whatever questions you got, just bring us your questions and we'll give you, our advice, what we might do, no obligation. But if you've got a client who has an interest in being philanthropic, again, just reach out. You can keep the client anonymous, and happy to work with you to figure out a solution because we're here to customize that experience, not only for the donor and the philanthropist, but also for the wealth advisor.
Extremely well said, Mark. And we too have seen, we have very few supporting foundations left because they really, the DAF makes so much more sense. It's so much more convenient, much less of a hassle, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I would just say, I think that your clients hire you because they want that incredibly high level of expertise and service that you provide. And the community foundations, the Jewish Community Foundation, we have that same level of expertise in a related contiguous field that really goes hand in hand with the work that you're doing. And your clients who want that high level of service and expertise from you want it in every area of their life. And what we provide is that level of service and customization and one-on-one hand-holding in the area of social impact. And increasingly, particularly in the wake of COVID and the strife in our nation, that people, the desire to make a difference while you're on the planet and when you leave the planet is just growing enormously. And our job is to help harness that in ways that make financial sense. And that's why we work together with you to make that happen. And it when it's done well, which we all do, it is the quintessential win-win-win.
Christy.
I can't begin to say what any better way than Mark and Beth have put it, but I think the idea is let's begin the conversation. If you haven't begun it yet with your clients, now's a really good time. We are in trusted relationships with one another. There's lots of options in San Diego, and we appreciate our relationship with all of you. And let's start the conversation. Let's see what we can do, because it is a win-win for everyone involved. And I'm going to have to drop off the call. I have another obligation in 2 minutes, but thank you for the opportunity to meet with you again. And just start the conversation. Have a good rest of the day. Terry, thanks for joining us. Mark and Beth, John, thanks for everything. Nice to see you all. Take good care.
Thank you, Beth, Christy, and Mark. Bill, do you close us out?
You bet. Terry, thank you so much for pulling this all together. And I really appreciate as we focused in on the roles of each of the community foundations and you have as far as what professional advisors can bring to the table and how they can talk with their clients about the great things that the community foundations do. Certainly, I know certain folks in the state planning councils are just fantastic as far as always thinking about the community foundation. And we all just need to, with all of the services that they bring, not only to their clients, our clients, but to the community as a whole. So any other questions we should put out there, Ollie?
I think the only question was the question about the source that you aggregate nationwide foundation giving. Terry, that was actually in reference to a slide you had put up saying that $1.4 billion had specifically gone to COVID relief since the pandemic began, and $6.7 billion from the 84 foundations had gone out to the community in 2020. So I think Roberta was curious where you aggregate that nationwide foundation giving.
Yeah, that's part of a service of community foundations, the Philanthropic Awareness Initiative that is led by Peter Benatento, who aggregates those numbers nationally and out of Boston with the philanthropic initiative there. So they keep tabs on kind of the aggregate numbers for the field. All those dollars distributed locally. But thank you for clarifying that.
Just for Roberta's interest there, the National Philanthropic Trust aggregates dollars every year around philanthropy, and the Nonprofit Quarterly also did a study, or aggregated some data on donor, particularly on donor advised fund distributions in the past year and a half, over 1920. So there's actually a growing number of sources, which is, the data helps us be more effective, which is great.
Well, thank you all so much, Mark, Beth, Christy, Terry, for moderating. I really appreciate your being part of the North County Estate Planning Council webinars. Obviously, it really must be a annual presentation, and I think the high-level big picture that you all provided was certainly much needed. We can talk about charitable remainder trusts and gifts, annuities, and lead trusts. That's later for the tax heads. But the stories that you all brought to the table really make a difference in getting everybody enthusiastic with talking with their clients. So thank you all, and we'll see you soon.
Enjoyed it.
Thank you, Terry, very much. Nice to meet you.